We will start our next panel in a minute. Please be settled. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a good lunch and some much needed rest. So, may I begin with the next session? So this is the fourth and the last panel of Geneva Forum 2021.
Yes, I heard.
The panel session 4 is titled China's Footprint Overseas Impacting Human Rights at Global Level and the Way Forward. May I request our speakers for the panel, Geneva, former envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Dr. Martin Hala, Director Synosis, Laura Hart from Global Committee for Rule of Law, Honourable André Gatulin, Senator, French Parliament. And we have Dr. Tenzin Desel, Senior Research Fellow, Tibet Policy Institute, as our chairperson. Thank you.
Remarkable speakers, and we have been discussing about the gulf between conceptual understanding, but we have practitioners who are going to give you, who are perhaps going to give us new insights into how do we deal with this increasing influence of China. And this particular theme that we're going to be exploring in this session is regarding China's footprint overseas impacting human rights at the global level and the way forward. And to my mind, it ought to be ways forward. I'm sure speakers over here are going to generate new ideas and then possibly open up new avenues for taking forward and thinking through some of the issues. Now, the format remains the same. I will request the speakers to speak for 15 minutes, and then afterwards, if we have time, then we will open up to the floor where you can ask your questions, and the speakers will have the opportunity to respond. And I will be introducing the speakers respectively, and then you can resume speaking, and then afterwards I will introduce the second speaker, and then to the last speaker. So the first speaker for this session, we have Geneva. So he was one of the two envoys of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, entrusted with the responsibility of conducting the dialogue with the Chinese leadership. And he also served as the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for Central and Eastern Europe from 1985 to 1992. He also served quite uniquely, because to be able to serve in both the continents, in India also, he served as the Secretary of His Holiness for International Relations at the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. So, may I request you to reflect and speak on this theme for 15 minutes, and then we'll resume the question and answer after that.
Thank you, Tenzin. My thanks also goes to the Tibet Bureau in Geneva for inviting me to this conference. My presentation is not academic, but mainly based on my personal experience, views, and personal insight. Since my age of 17, 18 years, I have been an active participant of the Tibetan struggle for freedom. And that means over 50 years, I have been endeavoring to understand the DNA of the CCP regime, its policies, and its ambitions. So my view on China is not based primarily on reading books or studying China as an academic subject, but by personally experiencing the suffering and witnessing the consequences of the China's brutal policies towards my people. So my presentation is therefore the sum of a lifelong occupation with the policies of CCP and in dealing face to face with China's officials and leaders. We Tibetans, I have some pain on my back and my left arm. So we Tibetans, we don't have hundreds of think tanks or thousands of sinologists, but we have been neighbors of China for 1,000 years. So our collective memory knows something about China, its past and present rulers, and above all, about China's political culture. So for too long, the international community has been dismissive of the Tibetan warnings about the CCP regime, and with dire consequences for the world today. So now to the topic of this panel. The first major political footprint on the world stage by the PRC, by the People's Republic of China, was its invasion and annexation of Tibet. This illegal act against another state changed the political landscape of Inner and East Asia, with severe political consequences for peace and stability in that part of the world till today. And I think this morning, Michael Van Walt has already explained very well. Tibet was, although despite the PRC's claims, Tibet was historically never part of China. Although in the course of its history, Tibet was subject to various degrees of Mongol, Manchu, and even British Empire's influences. However, this relationship never extended to the degree of Tibet becoming part of China. And this is highly relevant because it brings international legal obligations for both the PRC and all other states today. Most governments declare as their official policy to uphold international law and to assist in enforcing international law as a realistic and practical way of securing peace and justice worldwide. And as Michael has explained this morning, the PRC has not acquired sovereignty over Tibet since its invasion. Therefore, Beijing is obligated under international law to end its occupation and to permit the Tibetans to freely exercise their full right to self-determination. Moreover, it is not only the PRC which has obligations. International law stipulates that all governments have the duty not to recognize the illegal annexation of Tibet by China and not to assist Beijing in any way in maintaining its unlawful rule of Tibet. And finally, all governments have the positive duty to help in bringing an end to the occupation of Tibet and to permit and respect the Tibetan people's right to self-determination. The illegal annexation of Tibet was the first act in gross violation of international law by the newly established PRC as an international actor. Unfortunately, this disregard and breach of international law had no legal or political consequences for China. Consequently, as a result of this failure by the international community to hold China accountable for her unlawful act and to uphold international law with regard to Tibet has emboldened the sense of impunity of successive Chinese leadership and imbued them with an unbridled sense of entitlement. And the consequences of this are for all to see today. China today is presenting as an imminent threat to peace and security, to the present rule-based liberal international order. The examples of this are for all to see. Examples of this are plenty when we look at China's aggressive behavior toward India, Bhutan, its expansionism in South China and East China Sea, its interferences and bullying of Nepal, Mongolia, and other countries in Southeast Asia, its genocidal policies in Tibet and East Turkestan or Xinjiang, its blatant its demolition of democracy and fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong, and its blatant military intimidation of Taiwan. All of this displaying a total disregard for international rules and norms, which are directly related to how the international community has treated China's occupation and invasion and occupation of Tibet. It is a fact. The fact is that the failure by the international community to act on the question of Tibet has impacted the PRC's behavior as an international actor. For what has happened with regard to Tibet is the following. The international community tolerated injustice in Tibet to become customary injustice, and customary injustice to become customary rights of the PRC. Despite the fact that every successive generation of Tibetans have never acquiesced to the annexation of their country, never ceased to oppose and resist it. And this is exactly the lesson that successive Chinese leadership have drawn from its Tibet experience. And this is precisely also the playbook they are now applying to other international disputes in which the PRC is involved. So today it is very clear that the Chinese Communist Party is determined to change and reshape the international order and the world according to its perception. Towards this goal, the CCP is pursuing an ambitious, well-planned political program to exercise influence, to interfere and intervene worldwide. In the pursuit of this, the CCP is building alliances of autocrats around the world, silencing critics of its policy, using its economic and political power as a leverage, is infiltrating and undercutting Western institutions with the aim of weakening the opposition and resistance to its global ambitions. Clearly, the world is today in a battle for ideas, values, and the protection of democracy from the outside influence and interference. The concept of sharp power shows how outside authoritarian governments are impairing free expression, neutralizing independent institutions, and distorting the political environment. China has proven that it wants to shape how democracies think, what information they consume, how they do business, and how they operate their political culture. Let us be clear. This is not public diplomacy or soft power. This is political warfare according to the ancient Chinese strategy of winning without fighting. This is undermining the very lifeblood of democracies. Against this background, China's corrupting influence the world over must be countered and resisted. The community of democracies must stand up against a totalitarian China. We all need to realize that our basic freedom and rights are not safe and secure as long as there are such powerful dictatorships in other parts of the world. The community of democracies must join forces and pursue a more effective, robust, and strategic policy and hold China accountable for its systematic and gross violations of human rights and the principles of international law. Today, many democratic governments are reviewing its policies and approaches towards China. A wide range of mechanisms and instruments are being discussed to defend democratic institutions. However, this task need to be taken up not only by governments, but by political parties, public institutions, law enforcement agencies, universities, cultural institutions, media organizations, and private enterprises. In short, it requires an effort by the society as a whole with clear rules and codes of conduct in dealing with this totalitarian regime. A fundamental fallacy of the Western approach in promoting democracy and human rights in China has been its nearly exclusive focus on engagement with the regime. However, ultimately, it is the defenders, activists of human rights and democracy who will shape the future course of their country. Consequently, a principled, strategic, and effective human rights policy must aim at encouraging, strengthening, and empowering those activists and those forces. This means that every statement and initiative by governments must take into consideration how they might affect the spirit and actual situation of those advocates and activists on the ground. Unfortunately, many governments often take the sensitivity of the Chinese leaders as a measure on such issues. Above all, what we need today is the political will and a sense of unity, common purpose, and common mission of the democracies around the world. Therefore, we need a rededication in the belief, we need a rededication to our fundamental belief in the inherent equality and dignity of all human beings and in the values of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. This rededication to our fundamental values will strengthen the political will and self-confidence of our democracies, which we need in order to promote and champion the principles of the universality and indivisibility of the Declaration of Human Rights all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bunegas and Gezila, for providing this very insightful practitioner's account of what he has rightly characterized as the brutal occupation of Tibet. And one thing that is of particular importance when he was speaking, wants to think through these themes, that he has dropped a temporal marker that once when you start thinking about overseas impact, we have to start thinking about occupation of Tibet. That is the temporal marker that we have to start thinking about once when we talk about overseas impact. I think that's very insightful and very helpful for next speakers to think about and think through. So the next speaker we have is a politician, is a French politician and an academic, and he is currently, he is a member of French Senate, currently serving as Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and also Vice Chair of the European Affairs Committee. And as an academic, he's the author and co-author of 2 reports of the French Senate. So I presume this one is done as a member of the French the committee. And French Senate on China in September 2021. He is actively involved in the promotion of human rights, especially in Southeast Asia and Tibet. And he has a PhD in Information and Communication Sciences. He regularly teaches at the New Sorbonne University in Paris. And he is going to speak on China's increasing assertiveness, particularly through China's newfound voice in climate negotiation and China's meddling in academia in the rest of the world. So, Honourable Andre Gosselin, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Tenzin. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to warmly thank the organizers for this international forum on violation of rights by China. Thank you also to invite me on this panel dedicated to China footprint overseas. I think this is something very important. Today I do not speak as an academic, but as a politician. I'm fighting in favor of human rights at Tibet for around 40 years. It's very difficult when you are a national politician to say to people that, okay, you are not working for the people who elect you, but you work for people from Tibet, from Xinjiang, from Formosa or other country. And what is interesting today about China is to see that this influence, I said this global and systemic influence, is spreading all over the world, and it has directly nowadays consequences on their daily life. I said that because I just published some weeks ago a new report on the state foreign interferences on the university and the academic in France. Even if it was open to all the country, 95% of the report is regarding China. And I've never had on such subject, that's 10 years I'm a senator in France, I never had so many media interest by the topic. Because people were calling me, there was student, professor, or old people telling my daughter, my grandson is now a student. And what you say about the influence of China is true. And I'm afraid of that. And sometimes there's two possibilities to see a question. Or you have an overview and you try to go down to explain to people, or you look at their daily life, what are the influence, and trying to explain something more geostrategical. I think the second one is good for us, and if we want to reinforce, I would say, the backing, the sustain for Tibet or other people from the areas from Western countries, we have also to do that job to explain what it means for them today in their life. So it's very difficult to speak after Carl Sang because he said everything. I totally agree with what he said, and especially the second part of his speech. And so I will try to focus my speech on some specific point. The first, concerning perhaps on all. Firstly, the way the Chinese authority currently develop a very strong presence in all the international organizations and multilateral forum to enhance and reinforce their global influence. And secondly, all they specifically use climate and environmental topics to impersonate themselves as a fair and an unavoidable partner among European countries in a context of high tension between China and the United States. It is important here to record that after having stayed rather distant from the core of most the international organization for a long time, China decided 2 decades ago to become a much more active participant, especially in the United Nations institution. Firstly, to gain a kind of worldwide recognition of its growing power. Secondly, to improve the art of being influential and to gather new allies all over the world, starting from the beginning of the 70s to end the recognition of Taiwan by the United Nations, then to be considered as a third partner in the retrocession process of Macau and Hong Kong to China's mainland, and finally to build majorities to back its mission and its also power in various agencies or committees linked to the United Nations. And thirdly, last but not least, to challenge and reshape, as you said so well, the fundamental basis of the international order as it was established after the Second World War. In fact, if China is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, still since its creation in 1946, it has been for a long time a rather discreet player in this institution, preferring to act as a follower of some initiative taken by the USSR during the Cold War. The fall of the wall, and after that the collapse of the USSR, has opened a new era for China, which has taken an increasingly important place in international trade. The country has been warmly welcomed, we must underline that, by the United States and most of the Western countries when it decided to join the World Trade Organization in 2001. I discussed a lot with congressmen, and our senator told me that's the main era we've done in 1999 when the American Senate voted by 82 votes among 100 senators the entrance, and everybody was applauding like that because they suppose, due to this stupid theory of modernization of the state developed by, this is not really the theory of Lipset, but the use of the theory of Lipset and the modernization of the state, that when a country become, I would say, more capitalistic, more open market, it will automatically become democratic. And that's the contrary that happened. But this quest of China for systematic recognition in all the international organizations has really been boosted under Xi Jinping, using so-called anti-colonialist rhetoric and economic pressures too on developing countries. China has increasingly secured a large coalition of various undemocratic countries, not only to be admitted as a full member of all the international organizations, but also to obtain high-level position. Since 2013, the strategy has really been successful for China. The country currently has 4 among the 15 main international organizations, what is, I think, the largest representation that the country ever had at this level till the afterwar. These 4 organizations are the International Telecommunication Union, a very important organization in terms of telecommunication standardization, led by Wu Linzhao till January 2015. The second is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, led by Yong Li since 2013. Fortunately, he will leave the charge by the end of this year. I hope so. Number 3 is the Food and Agriculture Organization, led by Dongui Qiu, who took office in August 2019. This is a very strategic organization to develop influence in Africa and also in South America and many places. And the 4th is the ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank, a very influential banking institution in the Asian world, especially at the time where China follows on developing its Belt and Road Initiative in various areas of the world, and particularly in Asia. Although this list would be incomplete if I didn't mention 2 other major organizations that had been directed until very recently by 2 Chinese high executives. First, the International Civil Aviation Organization, led by Chinese Secretary from 2015 to July 2021, so only 2 months ago. This position at the top of the ICAO has been very useful for China to reject regular requests from Western countries to give to Taiwan an observatory status inside the organization. And of course, the second organization is Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization based in France, that had been under the presidency of Meng Hongwei from November 2016 to September 2018, the moment he has been arrested by Chinese authority during a trip to China on charge of bribery as a part of a national anti-corruption campaign. Anti-corruption, is a beloved argument given by the PCC to prosecute its opponents or two independent Chinese executives. Nevertheless, China remained a very influential member of Interpol, and as Russia has done for 2 decades, it is increasingly using Interpol as a means of pursuing dissidents abroad. A recent research on the internet website shows that there are currently 25 Chinese nationals wanted by China under the Interpol Red Notice. The Red Notice is a ask for an arrestation from one country belonging, here China, to all other countries. And sometimes it is based, when it comes from Russia or China, it is based on false declaration, false accusation. But you can be arrested in Spain, in France, or sometimes in the United States due to the Red Notice. That's something incredible. I done a hearing as part of the member of the Council of Europe 2 years ago, and the responsible of this procedure of Interpol were unable to explain us how they can reform the system not to be exploited by undemocratic and authoritarian countries. It's a real problem. Most of these international organizations are very influent in setting procedures, norms, and standards, especially regarding the most innovative technology. Establishing international technology standards which are beneficial to Chinese companies is a major tool in the harsh competition with American, European, and Japanese enterprises and companies. Since the beginning of the pandemic, China has continued its effort to strengthen its position in the system of the international institution. The purpose of China is to shape norms, standards, practice, and rules that will foster the long-term strategy and weaken the United States global position. Due to the multilateral nature of this institution, the Chinese authorities are seeking the support of the developing country, especially those with which they intensify economic cooperation. The majority of them represents Africa, Latin America, and Central Asia, often struggling with development problems as well as inefficient and oppressive political systems. China has also strengthening its position in institutions that are criticizing it for human rights violation for many years. During the 44th session of the UN Human Rights Council in July last year, 2 declarations were adopted in connection with the introduction of the Hong Kong National Security Law, which abolished its previous autonomy. The first one, expressing support for authorities of the PRC, was backed by 53 countries, mostly from Africa and from the Middle East, with a neutral attitude of the governments of Latin America and Southeast Asia. A competing declaration condemning this action of authorities in Beijing was supported by only 23 governments of democratic and developed countries. This example illustrates how the growing economic position in the developing countries can be used to build political influence in the international arena. It serves as a tool to legitimize Chinese action and promote a vision of politics based on principles such as sovereignty, non-interference, and win-win cooperation. The rise of China's status is not only a matter of obtaining top jobs in the international organization. It is also a question of allocated funds in this organization and active commitments to provide second and third rank executive or other human resources in them. This approach used by Beijing is particularly noticeable in the area of the United Nations peacekeeping operation, both in terms of volume of the sent contingent and allocated funds. Between 2008 and 2020, the PRC's financial contribution to operating budget in this area increased from around $700 million to around $1,000 million, $1 billion. Among the UN Security Council, China not only has the largest contingent, about 2,500 blue helmets, but also exceed all combined force to the other superpower. So yes, I'm a bit long. I have to reassure. We all discovered, what is interesting is that last year during the COVID pandemic, people, large audience, they at least discovered the real influence of China, especially on the World Health Organization. In April last year, President Trump described the WHO as sinocentric and decided to suspend the funding of the organization. In response, Chinese officials announced that they would increase support for the organization by $50 million more. And what is interesting in that is that the Western country today need, it's a real necessity to increase their involvement in the field of international institutions and broaden the scope of coordination between key actors in order to guarantee a deciding vote. In terms of financial contribution for this institution, you have compulsory contribution, the main one, and also voluntary contribution to major organizations. China currently ranks only at the 5th rank internationally, far behind the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Japan. My country, France, is only 10th in this ranking. Its financial weight, the weight of China, should, however, increase significantly during the coming years because the compulsory contribution of the various states is indexed to the average GDP per capita, with a mechanical consequence of China's rise and inevitable decline of Western democracy. Given the influence that China has gained over the past 10 decades in this major institution, there is reason to be concerned about the future when China will be among the world's top 3 contributors. The only way to counter this irresistible rise of China in international contribution is for Western democracy to decide to substantially raise a voluntary contribution to this institution. It is what I recommend as Special Rapporteur for the budget of the French Ministry for Foreign Affairs in the French Senate. For 3 years, my government has responded positively to our request, so we have had our voluntary contribution in a main strategic international organization. This is a good thing, even if the financial effort on this matter should be higher. So I will not have time to talk about the influence on environment, but I would say just one word is that for a long time, European countries were very naive in front of China. We only consider for till 10 years ago that they were partner, good partner. We have waited until 2017. I remember the creation, State of Union of former President of the European Commission, Mr. Juncker. For the first time, he says they are competitors. And only for 2 years, France, but also the presidency of the European Commission, say they are also systemic rival on human rights. And the new mantra is that we have to distinguish three things with China. They are systemic rival on human rights, okay, but nobody do nothing about that. They are competitors, strong competitors in economic and trade, and they are fair partners on multilateralism and ecology. This is totally a fake. When I say at the beginning of my speech that China has a global and systemic view, you cannot distinguish areas of cooperation. They use all the methods. All what they say about policy for struggling in China against climate change is totally fake. It's only based on declaration. If you see the evolution of the pollution in China, also the emission of carbon, they are still increasing. And they're launching all over some fake news telling that the United States are more polluters than them. This is totally wrong. If we take example from all the data we got from the World Bank or for data from the United Nations. So it's very important that they use this rhetorics on environment and climate change to not to lose the face and to continue to say to France or other country, such as now at the COP26, we are good partners. Even if they didn't come to the COP26 physically, they use that because it's a kind of pretext for our country to still continue to discuss with them because they are good guy and that the bad guy was the United States who decided under Trump to leave the agreement on Paris. And it's very interesting not to be, as a former ecologist, I say we must be aware because this question of ecology and environment is very important among our public opinion all over Europe. And they try to recreate a good image of them through that, but they do not act. It's only something used tactically. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Honourable Andrei Gosselin. In order to save time, I'm not going to make any extra comments, so I'm just going to jump straight in introducing the next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Martin Hala. He was educated in Prague, Shanghai, Berkeley, and Harvard. He taught in Prague and Bratislava, and he's the founder and director of Synopsis, a joint project between academia and the Institute of East Asian Studies at the Charles University in Prague. In 2014 to 15, he was the regional manager for Asia Pacific at the Open Society Foundations, and he is going to be speaking on China's attempt.
Maybe I'll say that myself.
Okay, fine, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
And you will have the floor for 15 minutes.
Okay, I don't think I need 15 minutes. I'll probably need something like 10. I'd like to say a few words today about how the rise of China undermines the international human rights system. And I will start with a little personal recollection. When I was growing up in communist Czechoslovakia before 1989, human rights was a very potent, very powerful notion that was taken seriously by both the victims and defenders of human rights and the perpetrators. And the perpetrators, of course, in that part of the world were mostly the communist parties. And in those days, the communist parties realized that they were on a thin ice in terms of human rights. They were on the defensive. They knew that they were losing their argument. And most of the time they were just trying to deflect or avoid the discussion, any discussion on human rights. So that's one thing that has changed recently, quite significantly, and I'll try to explain how, in my mind, we have come to this point. So, in 1989, the revolutions in Eastern Europe opened the way for the so-called third wave of democratization that swept Eastern Europe in that year. And they also brought back the respect for human rights in this part of the world. And for a while, in the 90s and the early 2000s, it looked as though the progress in human rights worldwide was unstoppable. If you try to remember those years, concepts like the universal jurisdiction for crimes against humanity or the right to protect were seriously discussed in those days. Nobody really speaks about that anymore. In 2011, Steven Pinker published his celebrated and somewhat controversial book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he argued that one of the reasons why violence had been declining globally was what he called the rights revolution that was sweeping the world in his rendering since the 1950s. Ironically, it seems that it was at about that very same time, at the turn of the first decade of the millennium, or even slightly earlier, that the rights revolution, the human rights revolution, seems to have started to reverse, and human rights and democracy in general began to retreat. And this great reversal had been happening gradually, but if I had to put a date on it, I would probably say that the turning point was around the year 2008. And it actually had a lot to do with China and Tibet. Again, you will remember that 2008 was famously the year of the financial crisis in much of the world, that China has weathered, relatively in relatively good shape. It was also the year of the Beijing Olympics. That was sort of like a coming out of China into the international scene. And the Olympics was marked by many human rights promises from the Chinese side that were never fulfilled. As a matter of fact, after the Olympics, the human rights situation in China, if anything, only got worse. And the outside world just shrugged and let the CCP get away with it. Perhaps even more importantly, before the Olympics, there was the unrest in Lhasa in March 2008 that led to widespread repression in Tibet, but also to the first instance that I can think of cross-border repression of the Tibetan community in Nepal. As far as I can remember, this was the first instance of extraterritorial suppression of human rights perpetrated by the Communist Party of China. I remember those days well because I was actually working in Nepal at that time, so I have very, very clear recollections. Last but not least, we should also probably point out that 2008 was the year when the Charter 08 was released in China, modeled after the Czechoslovak Charter 77, and basically demanding the same thing, demanding that China observes its own constitution. That movement, the Charter 08 movement, was almost immediately suppressed, and the main drafter of the charter, Honourable, was put in jail, where he died, despite the fact that he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So it only got worse from there, especially after Xi Jinping came to power. Xi Jinping came with several innovations. His new era is marked by stress on self-confidence. In fact, 4 self-confidences, as the phrase goes in China, and specifically, the Communist Party of China no longer feels inferior in their way of dealing with human rights to the Western world. In fact, they have been trying not to deflect or avoid the topic, but rather to redefine the very notion of human rights. Basically substituting individual and even collective rights with state-led, party-controlled, top-down version of economic development. To push this notion of human rights, the CCP denies the universality of human rights as defined in the Universal Declaration of 1948. It claims that this notion of human rights is a Western concept that has been imposed on the non-Western world, and specifically on China, which has its own different tradition. Such an argument is patently untrue. It contradicts the historical facts. In reality, in the committee that drafted the Universal Declarations of Human Rights, one of the most active members was a Chinese lawyer and diplomat, Zhang Hengchun, who is also commonly known in the West as P.C. Zhang. And interestingly, P.C. Zhang even argued in front of the United Nations that many of the influential Western thinkers on rights had been guided by Chinese ideas. In 1948, he told the United Nations General Assembly, quote, "In the 18th century, when progressive ideas with respect to human rights had been first put forward in Europe, translations of Chinese philosophers had been known to and had inspired such thinkers as Voltaire, Quesnay, and Diderot in their humanistic revolt against feudalism." So in short, P.C. Zhang was a living proof that human rights is neither Western or Eastern, but, a universal concept. China now conveniently forgets the contribution of one of its most illustrious scholars, legal scholars, and his contribution to the foundational document of the contemporary human rights system. And instead, China proposes to redefine the very concept of human rights into the right of the state, or in the Chinese case, we can say the party state, to treat its population any way it chooses, as long as it can claim to deliver economic development. This is, in a sense, a full denial of human rights as we know them. Still, the CCP manages to put this revisionist concept forward in the very institutions that were originally designed to implement the ideas spelled out in the Universal Declaration, namely in the Human Rights Council here in Geneva. One of the instruments that it uses for this repurposing of the Human Rights Council is the advisory committee of the council. That was originally designed as kind of a think tank for the Human Rights Council. It was meant to be filled with independent experts, but nowadays among its most active members is not an independent expert, but a Chinese career diplomat, Liu Xincheng, who had been promoting through the advisory committee concepts like the mutually beneficial cooperation in human rights. That phrase essentially implies replacing critical scrutiny of the member states' human rights record as institutionalized in the UPR and the Universal Periodic Review, with governments patting each other on their shoulders for delivering higher GDP. The results of this shift are now observable in the industrial scale violations in East Turkestan, or Xinjiang as it's called in Chinese, and the muted response to this calamity by the Human Rights Council. For every resolution proposed by the democratic states critical of the situation in Xinjiang, there's immediately a counter-resolution supporting the Chinese approach, signed by even more undemocratic members of the Council. In this situation, the CCP no longer feels ashamed by their own human rights violations. They feel triumphant in making them the new international standard. Let's hope they won't become the global new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin Hala, and thank you for particularly pointing out the role of P.C. Chang and pointing out the fact that this is not entirely a Western concept, but this document is a universal idea and it has to be thought and implemented in that fashion. So thank you. And for the final speaker of this panel, I would introduce Laura Hart. She is an Italian political activist for human rights and the rule of law with a focus in China, and the campaign director at Safeguard Defenders. And she is also serving as the regional liaison for the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and on the advisory group of Hong Kong Voice. So, Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tenzin, and thank you for the kind invitation to participate. I feel a bit humbled and nervous to speak after these very experienced speakers who obviously have been working on this a lot longer than I have. So please forgive me if I repeat some of what has already been stated, or if I am a bit naive maybe. You know, we tend to come in maybe into this and think we can change the world and everything that has happened before us doesn't matter, and we can reinvent the wheel as we speak. But so obviously, as said, a lot has already been stated, and in particular I want to thank President Yeltsin, who, when he was talking about the warnings that the world had gotten through what had happened to Tibet, actually reminded me of the first warning I remember receiving from some Tibetans when meeting them in the European Parliament over a decade ago, when they said, you know, you will see what is happening in Tibet, and then Uyghurs would say that as well, what is happening in Xinjiang, you will see this will happen to you. And I remember thinking, you know, with all due respect, what is happening to you is horrible and we need to fight against it, but you know, I don't really think that this is likely to happen to us very soon. Unfortunately, I've had to rethink that, as all of you have, I think. And what we see today increasingly, especially from a human rights defender's point of view, is truly a new global regime of political terror that the CCP is not only trying to install, but that increasingly we can see already at work. And so, Martin, I fear that that is actually what the new normal looks like. And I think a lot of cases go underreported, obviously, of human rights offenders, of people in exile who feel, in a way, silenced, who live in fear of speaking up, of reporting what is happening to them. But it suffices to look at our own governments in the West and how afraid they are to speak out against what is happening in the PRC. When we hear Hong Kongers talk about the chilling effect on the streets of Hong Kong, the fact that they are no longer willing, you know, to go out, the fact that they are disappearing from social media channels such as Twitter, the fact that they are fleeing because of this chilling effect, actually that is exactly what we see happening to our governments and even within our parliaments, where, you know, yes, we know what is going on, but it's better, it's not the right moment, we need to talk climate change, we have economic interests, look at what's happening everywhere. So it's truly, I think the right word is political terror. Now, what can we do on this? Again, I don't want to repeat what has already been said. I think obviously the task in front of us, what we activists that are lucky enough not to live within the PRC, and so we do actually still have the freedom, is decreasing, but we still have the freedom to act. One of them is obviously to support human rights defenders that are still inside the PRC, which is increasingly difficult, but we can still do that, and we must still do that. And obviously being here in Geneva, there are many UN procedures who very often maybe they seem quite distant, but they are very interested in helping, in speaking up about what's happening, and in raising those issues. And the other one obviously is what this panel is about, countering the CCP's foreign influence. Again, I'm pretty new to the whole foreign influence thing. I remember actually getting into it thanks to someone who was previously in this room, I don't see him now, Dolkun Isa, who in 2017 was kind enough to come to Rome to speak at the Senate to denounce what was happening in Xinjiang. We were then quite at the beginning, as we knew it, of the mass internment campaign in the concentration camps. And what shocked me actually, when he was stopped from going into the Italian Senate, he was detained for 4 hours by anti-terrorism police thanks to an Interpol red notice, which had already been deemed illegal by Germany, where he's a citizen. What actually surprised me more was not his detention, but the fact that despite the fact that journalists were calling the day itself, asking for comments, they were going to do a story and so on, in Italian media, the next day, and up till this day, nothing ever came out. Nothing was ever reported. When we need to find something on this, we need to go to Radio Free Asia there was even a Reuters story, but there is not actually any, except for Radio Radicale, Italian reporting on this. So I remember that was the moment where I understood what other people had been telling me was actually happening. So how can we counter this? What I like to do, and other people will tell me whether that is a good tactic, I also have to admit it's sometimes quite fun, which is not a nice thing to say when it comes to the horrible human rights abuses we're talking about. But what I like to do is to look at what is the PRC, what is the CCP investing in massively at the international level, and what do they absolutely not like. And I think those are two great indicators of how we can actually try to counter some of their horrible influence abroad. The first thing they definitely do not like is for us to identify and inform or expose what they are doing, exposing how they're trying to influence governments abroad, individual members of parliament, academia, research institutes, what you have, and obviously we have here Martin Hala with Synopsis, who has been doing an amazing job on that. A second one, obviously, is we need to, on the basis of that information, tackle our own vulnerabilities. And that starts with ending the strategic dependency from the PRC when it comes to trade. I think one of the big lessons we have learned, and it's funny to think about the German way of saying it. What is it? Change through trade. I won't try to say it in German. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Adrian. I mean, we have seen change through trade actually, only in the exact opposite way of what we would have liked to be seeing, because we now have actually Western companies that manage to become big companies, gain a lot of capital, advance in the world, make huge innovations, thanks to human rights, open markets, and so on, that are now actually working against those very systems on behalf of the PRC government, hoping, and I think, I don't know why, to make some short-term gain, because it's quite obvious that there will be no long-term gain. So we need a whole of society approach to counter this, and that means that those people, those companies, need to come on board. It's also an invite, I think, to you when we talk about strategic dependency, Senator Gatorna, to please ask the French government to maybe rethink some of its positioning and the wording it is using in, we'll get into that later. A third point is definitely sanctioning. We've seen Western governments have been quite afraid and reluctant to impose sanctions, global Magnitsky sanctions or similar, on the PRC, but I think from the allergic reaction that they've had to that happening, even though they were very minimal, I think that is a very effective way. We need to aim for more sanctions, and we need to aim for more, let's say, higher up sanctions as soon as possible. It's going to be difficult, but that needs to be, let's say, a whole of activist approach together with members, obviously, of parliament, such as through the IPEC network. And the last thing, which is actually maybe the most important thing I wanted to talk to you about today, is tackling some of the more, let's say, nefarious mechanisms that are actually supporting this global regime of political terror, in making sure that there are consequences in certain cooperation agreements, making sure that the PRC feels that there are consequences when it is not respecting human rights as they are actually written down, as they have actually been subscribed to by the PRC government, and as they have been ratified. One of the most important things in this is countering their extraterritorial policing efforts, or their long-arm policing, as it has been called. Long-arm policing, increasingly by any means necessary. We obviously have the official channels of the extradition treaties. And again, when I said, what is China, what is the PRC investing in? They've been investing massively in signing extradition treaties and ratifying extradition treaties with countries in the world, signing judicial cooperation agreements with countries in the world, and with some UN bodies, such as the UN ODC, who has famously signed an judicial cooperation or whatever agreement, we don't know, because they don't want to release it, with an extrajudicial body, which the PRC is trying to accredit as, let's say, the official authority for international judicial cooperation, the National Supervision Commission. So, countering extradition treaties, exposing the means of involuntary returns, the illegal policing efforts that the PRC is doing on foreign territory, making sure that we have adequate reporting mechanisms, protection mechanisms for people, for dissidents, for people in exile that are living outside of the PRC and that are feeling increasingly afraid to speak up, to denounce what is happening. So to protect the witnesses of what is happening in the PRC is something that I think, as countries that state they want to abide to the rule of law, protect human rights, we need to work on urgently. A last part of this is not only, as I said, protecting those defenders, protecting those people abroad, protecting also the foreigners, because the interesting thing is, and the unfortunate truth is, that only when it actually touches upon foreigners, maybe Western governments will become more aware of this. But we've now seen that both in Denmark and in the UK, local citizens, let's say, nationals, both members of parliament and activists, have been warned by their intelligence services not to travel to countries with extradition treaties, because they might be at risk of extradition to the PRC. I want to conclude with, on this note, with citing the necessary consequences on this. As I stated, it's not only about protecting, it's also about making sure the PRC feels some actual consequences, because the clear aim of all these bilateral agreements, the clear aim of all these, call it also memorandum of understanding that we have seen, not only on judicial cooperation, but for example on the BRI, and so on, these political signs that the PRC wants to send, obviously have one very important reason, which is they are clearly seeking continued legitimization. And that is something that you also talked about, Kelsa. So I think working against this, making sure that we will not recognize systems that are clearly, completely illegal when it comes, for example, to their judicial system, when it comes to the way they are treating people, would be a very powerful tool in countering some of the efforts they've been making in something they clearly very, very much want. So I think those are for me the main points I hope we can work on together in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation and for speaking with such clarity and passion. Since I've been rather too strict in my timekeeping, I'm going to give time if you have any concluding remarks if you want to make, and then I can open up for the members on the floor to ask questions. So if you wanted to make any concluding remarks, if I've been too strict when I was timekeeping, please do.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add one word about the fact that we did not talk about freedom in Tibet or in China. We talk about freedom in our country. When I hear some researchers, there is a very nice social researcher, Italian, she called Claudia Starita. She works on Chinese community overseas, in Australia, but now in France, Great Britain, Germany. She shows how people get pressure, not only the diaspora of Chinese students, but all the students from the country, not to talk about Uyghur, about Tibet, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. More and more the freedom of speech in our countries, developed countries, consolidate democracy are at stake. And this is a real problem. We must say that. We must say also to all the citizens of our so beloved democratic country that yet censorship and self-censorship. When I heard during 3 months preparing my report, so many researchers, teachers in the university, they say we can do nothing, especially when we are preparing a lesson on the internet due to the pandemic. We receive message because at the time, 1 hour, 9 minutes, we receive a message from the embassy of China. You say, exactly, because we don't know. In the university, it's a free place. Some student can go back and send a message to the embassy, say, this teacher said something. But here, you have the proof. They say, okay, you say that. When do you say that? You will have no more visa to visit China, no more resources, no more things if you do that. So, the question today, I'm sorry to tell that to all my Tibetan friends, it's not only their problem, it's our problem. And the way it is spreading, the speed it takes, means that by 15 or 20 years, we are a Chinese colony. We are a voluntary Chinese colony if we do nothing. And it's time to act, it's time to go forward. Thank you.
On that note, I'll be taking questions for the esteemed speakers on the dais.
That means you're also very clear in your message.
Yes, thank you for the positive.
Or people are very tired at this time.
That could be another reason.
Any questions? Okay, so since there's, it appears that it's quite clear, as Kongsi Gyongla just said, that all speakers on the dais have been very clear and spoke with immense passion that people are taking time to process the information that has been disseminated from this dais. So with this, I would like to emphasize that it's a particular honor for me to chair this session, and I wanted to thank all the speakers for taking out time and speaking at this final panel of Geneva Forum 2021. Thank you, and thank you for your patience and attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tibet, Office of Tibet Brussels, to please offer katas to our speakers.
It's time to cut
Next, I would like to invite our drafting committee for Geneva Forum Declaration, Dr. Michael Van Prague and Mr. Kai Müller, to please come up on the stage.
Just some paper. Sure. Left mine at the
I have, I'll bring.
Any paper.
Yeah. Kai will have it. And here. Here, right?
Michael, you read through, right?
Yes, but I'll have to be able to read it. Yeah, but it's a little...
Oh, you
yeah,
can
that
scroll,
works.
scroll, yeah.
I can't scroll.
Yeah.
So, good afternoon again. I'm sorry you're going to get tired of listening to my voice. It's been a little bit much, perhaps, not out of my choice. But we're going to be starting an important but short process, which is to adopt, if you like, a declaration of this conference, of this meeting, of this forum. We've tried to include things that have come up during the conference, recommendations that have been made, or at least statements that have been included, ideas that have been included, and so forth. It's not comprehensive, I'm sure it can't be, and we also don't want to make it a multi-page type of declaration. So it's short, and I hope it reflects the spirit of the conference. I've been asked to read it and then to give you the floor in terms of some additions or changes that you may suggest. I would urge us not to spend time on too much grammatical and word picking unless it has a core importance. I mean, I'm one who is very keen on always using the right language, as you know, not to speak about Tibetan and Uyghur minorities, for example, but peoples, not to talk about Tibet and East Turkestan as western parts of China, all those types of things, yes. So correct us if anything like that has come into this document, any factual errors, but not, let's not spend too much time on grammar and spellings and so forth. We will correct that afterwards. But if there are really important things that we've been missing in terms of ideas or in terms of things that we are really concerned about, then please do speak up and we will try to incorporate it in a concise way. Is that process acceptable? Should we do it paragraph by paragraph or just read the whole thing and then ask for paragraph for suggestions? Perhaps read the whole thing, because there are sometimes you will find that an idea you may have is incorporated sometime later. So I will read the whole thing as you can also read it up behind me, and then I will solicit your responses. So the 4th Geneva Forum 2021 and the date. We, the speakers and participants of the 4th Geneva Forum 2021 on economic, social and cultural rights violations by China, are appalled at the persistence of systematic and gross violations of human rights by the government of the People's Republic of China, PRC, and its ruling Chinese Communist Party, CCP, in China and in other regions under its control, and specifically for the breach by the PRC of its obligations under the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, in Tibet, East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia. Are alarmed by and condemn the PRC's repression and its implementation of policies of sinicization of Tibetans, Uyghurs and Mongolians, including in particular, as regards the Tibetans, the denial of access by Tibetans to education in their mother tongue, the violation of religious freedom and undermining of the Tibetan Buddhist reincarnation practice and protocols, involuntary family separation policies, and through these and other policies, the destruction of the distinct Tibetan culture, way of life, and national identity. And as regards the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan, their massive arbitrary incarceration and in internment camps. Are deeply concerned also by the injurious design and implementation of environmental policies of the government of the PRC, which failed to provide mechanisms for free, prior and informed consent, FPIC, by Tibetans, Uyghurs and others, and for redress and accountability for violations, whereas such mechanisms are essential for safeguarding human rights. Are gravely concerned by the PRC's coercive labor and nomad relocation programs under the guise of poverty alleviation in East Turkestan and Tibet, and the denial of judicial recourse for affected people. Excuse me for this. Recognize and emphasize that these and other violations of human rights of Tibetans and Uyghurs by the PRC are consequences and symptoms of the PRC's violation and denial of the fundamental right of the Tibetan people and the people of East Turkestan to self-determination provided for in Common Article 1 of the ICESCR and the ICCPR, the exercise of which is a prerequisite for the enjoyment of other rights enshrined in these covenants. Are gravely disturbed by the PRC and its Communist Party's growing role, influence and impact on the international human rights system, which it undermines as it attempts to redefine it to serve its own political interests. Welcome the concern expressed by the UN human rights experts, UN member states and civil societies in this past year regarding the situation in Tibet, East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia, including on the violations of economic, social, and cultural rights in these regions. Welcome in particular the joint statement by over 50 UN experts to establish an independent mechanism to closely monitor, analyze and report annually on human rights situation in China and regions under its control, and the comprehensive list of issues transmitted by the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in relation to third periodic review of China. We therefore call upon the government of the People's Republic of China to respect and guarantee all human rights and their universal validity in compliance with the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Stop with immediate effect the policies of repression, forced and coerced labor, and forced Sinicization of Tibetans, Uyghurs and Mongolians. Fully respect, permit and facilitate, without delay, the exercise of the full right to self-determination by the Tibetan people and the people of East Turkestan. Restore and respect the autonomy of Hong Kong as established in its basic law, the Constitution of the PRC and the Joint Declaration. Call upon the Human Rights Council to follow up with the June 2020 joint statement by UN experts to act with a sense of urgency and create an independent mechanism to monitor the human rights situation of Tibetans, Uyghurs, of Chinese human rights defenders and others. Call upon the Committee on International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in its ongoing review of the report of the People's Republic of China to the Committee to urge the Chinese government to abolish policies such as coercive settlement and labor programs that are in contravention of the Covenant. Call upon the international community to urge the Chinese government to ratify core ILO, that's International Labour Organization, conventions on forced labor. Call upon the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, to address the denial of access of Tibetans to education in their mother tongue and more consistently protect Tibetan cultural heritage with UNESCO World Heritage status. Call upon parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and to the Convention on Biological Diversity to establish a strong rights-based approach to policies on climate change and biodiversity, while acknowledging the urgent need for transparency and accountability of stakeholders when implementing such policies, in particular of the People's Republic of China. Call upon all states and international institutions to counter and report on extraterritorial policing and acts of intimidation against exiled Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongols, human rights defenders, Mongolians it should be, human rights defenders and political dissidents by the PRC. Call upon all states and their governments, international institutions and business enterprises, including multinational corporations, to oppose coercive labor practices of the PRC in Tibet and East Turkestan, to provide detailed reports examining supply chains with regard to the use of forced or coerced labor, and to ban products produced through forced and or coerced labor, and to fully and meaningfully implement relevant human rights treaty obligations and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights in their dealings with the People's Republic of China, including the obligation to respect and promote the realization of people's rights to self-determination and to stop all governmental and corporate activities that violate any of those rights. That was a very long sentence. We have tried to bring into this declaration things that are of particular relevance to the economic, social, and cultural rights, since that is a theme of this conference, and not to bring too many extraneous issues that are as important but do not necessarily fit into this rubric. So that may be one reason why you'll find that some things that have been mentioned are not reflected as clearly as you might have expected. Yes, sir.
Since there was a special session on pension refugee status, I think it's very important that we mention a special mention of pension refugee status and also call for the Chinese leadership to report to the international
Yes, I think we can put a first paragraph under the concern paragraphs and then one under the action to be taken. Yes. Thank you for that.
There was no mention of Hong Kong in the concerns. There was one. But on the action it is there, but it's not in any of the if it's necessary or not.
There are some provisions in the first half that are of a general nature, in which one could read in that it includes Hong Kong, other regions under Chinese control, etc. But I take the point, and there's no reason not to specifically mention it, so we should. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Gloria from Tibet Justice Centre. It was just a comment on starting sentence 60.
Sorry, which one? Which?
60.
Okay, thank you.
So it mentions creating an independent mechanism. I wonder if we should remove the term Chinese human rights defenders, because the way I read it makes it sound like we're specifically referring to the situation just of human rights defenders as opposed to Tibetan Uyghurs, Chinese and others. On 63.
Point taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else?
Remove Chinese?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your work. I was wondering if we could pick up the word like cultural genocide or genocide, what happened in Tibet, since we also had a very strong talk about this topic. And you already said we cannot cover all, but since the Olympic Games are coming up, maybe you could write one sentence regarding our demand that political boycott or something like this.
The first part I got, and I think we would agree to mention cultural genocide in both the cases of Tibet and East Turkestan. What was the second point that you made? I didn't fully get that.
Just to make a call, probably to the political or the governments, not to attend the Olympic Games 2022 in China, or somehow just include that this is coming up.
The Olympic boycott. Any objections to doing that?
I think you should also mention your presentation on calling on the governments not to recognize or not to mention that Tibet is part of China or East Turkestan. That also should be reflected with. That was one important part of the discussion.
All right, we will include that in it. In fact, I think it could go, yes. We'll put a paragraph on that in it. Thank you for that. In fact, we might very well use similar type of language as what is in the report of the appropriations language, because it is perfect language. So something on those lines I would like to include. Thank you.
You have those wordings?
We have it, yes.
In the appropriations? The wordings in the appropriations?
Yeah, we have it. I have it also on my telephone, but yeah, thank you. Anything else? Well, in that case, I thank you very much. We will put in these edits. Then I'm assuming that it will be distributed in print form, but I'm not sure exactly what the arrangement is.
Pardon me?
Is it going to be distributed in print form before people leave?
We should, actually, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you so much the Geneva Forum Declaration. With this, we have successfully adopted the 2021 Geneva Forum Declaration. Thank you. We now move to the end of our program, the last closing session for today. So, like Michael has mentioned, once everything is revised, this will be published online on tibet.net and also will be available if you need soft copies of the declaration later on. So, moving on to the closing program, may I request Honourable Sikong Representative to please come up on the stage, and Honourable Andre Gatlin, Senator, French Parliament. I also invite Secretary Karmachi, Department of Information and International Relations, CTA. We also have another guest, Honourable Zaniyak, Mayor of Prague, Czech Republic, but he could not be here physically. However, we have a message from him that will be read by Ms. Carden later on. First, may I request Honourable Sikong to please address and give your closing.
I think we have had one of the most attentive and most disciplined forum. I didn't see too many people outside wandering around. Everybody was inside. And in fact, I was the only one who was outside. Please excuse me because I had to attend to interviews and those kind of things. Therefore, I could not listen to some of the presentations. But in the 2 days, we covered a lot of ground on the social, economic, and cultural violations by China in Tibet, in East Turkestan, in southern Mongolia, in Hong Kong. And I stand in solidarity with all our friends from these regions. All I can say is that, to repeat what I said at the inaugural session, that we remain committed in our non-violent approach. And when we talk about non-violent approach, then we talk about a negotiated solution. When we talk about a negotiated solution, then we talk about a mutually beneficial solution. That is a lasting one, that we don't have to revisit again and again. And that is our hope, and we remain sincerely committed to reach out to the Chinese government if they have the political will to resolve the Tibetan conflict, to resolve the Uyghur conflict, to resolve the Hong Kong conflict, and to attend to the concerns of the people of South Mongolia. I think I can represent all our friends also in our commitment to reach out. But at the same time, till such a lasting solution is found, we are also committed to studying the reality of situation inside Tibet and point it out to the Chinese government that the policies and the programs that they implement in Tibet is not beneficial, both for the Chinese government, as well as the Tibetan people, as well as the Uyghur people, or the Southern Mongolians, or the Hong Kong people. If the Chinese government has good sense of a ruler, then it's their duty to make sure that the aspiration of the people whom they rule is met, not merely impose what they believe to be the solution. I understand that for every problem in China, the Communist Party thinks that development is solution. But that is not the reality. Speaking for the Tibetans, we have been practicing Buddhism for the last more than 1,300 years. Material development alone does not bring happiness to people. Tibetan people need the right to use the language, to practice their religion. Then only will our people's aspirations be met. And that is what the Chinese leadership need to understand. And at the same time, we are also, till a lasting solution is found for the Tibetan issue, we are committed to take our case to the international community, whether the Chinese government likes it or not. Despite all the challenges that we face today in terms of social changes and the demographic changes that are happening within the Tibetan diaspora, we are committed, and we will be launching a program called Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group on 6th November in Zurich. And I'm also very happy with the presence of quite a number of young Tibetans at this conference, at this forum, whom I had the opportunity to meet for a brief period during today's lunch. And I seek the support of and the involvement of all the young Tibetans. Despite the challenges we face, we also have this opportunity of Tibetans in more than 17 different countries outside India, Nepal, and Bhutan. Now these Tibetans, particularly the young ones, have become citizens of the nations where they live. They speak the language. They understand the system. The only thing is that we need to provide them a little more information and help them in organizing themselves. It is the duty of the Tibetans, whether we like it or not. In this lifetime, our flesh, our blood, our bone are Tibetan, whatever nationality you have. Therefore, it is the duty of every single Tibetan to put in their effort with the leadership of the Central Tibetan Administration and with the cooperative effort of all the Tibetans and with the support of the international community. I can assure you and all the Tibetans inside Tibet that we will be able to multiply our efforts in advocating for Tibet, and that should yield positive results. Therefore, I am very happy that I also commend the organizers, the Office of Tibet Geneva and the Department of Information and International Relations, for organizing a very well-planned forum. But again, as I mentioned before also, we'll need to appraise the outcome of the last 4 years of efforts and also look at the timing of this forum, whether it's too early for the periodical review and the structure of this program. We'll be having discussion with the stakeholders and then come out with positive recommendations for improvement whenever or wherever we have the next forum. We also need to look at whether we need to have this every year or not. So there are issues that we need to attend to these. And I very much appreciate the presence of the Vice President of Czech Republic, who not only graced the occasion here, but is very active in promoting the cause of Tibet in his country. That is what we need, not just words, but deeds that reflects your conviction and your commitment to support the Tibetan issue. And he also offered me to come to Dharamsala. I think the plan was very much there. The pandemic stalled it, and the pandemic came from Wuhan, so Chinese were also responsible for him not being able to come to Dharamsala earlier. But I'm sure by next year, when the pandemic ebbs a bit, and I really hope that he can come for the March 10th anniversary in Dharamsala. And I really appreciate your presence here. And also France, with all the contacts that he had with the Tibetans in Dharamsala, with the influence that he had and with the position that he holds, and at this young age as a deputy mayor. And I look forward to France shouldering more important roles in your country, and I really look forward to working with all of you. And then, of course, my friend André Gatolin. He is very, very vocal. It's not just him. His wife also prods him all the time to work for Tibet. And he is there everywhere. We were in Rome together, and he's right now with us. And at any given time, whenever he's requested, he's always there. And I also want to thank Nicholas Waldo for his presence, and I'll be meeting him day after tomorrow. As co-chair of the Swiss Parliamentary Friends of Tibet, we'll have more discussions as to how we can move things in the Swiss Parliament and with the government. And all the panelists, the experts, I was asking the younger generation of Tibetans during the lunchtime as to what they felt, and they were very inspired. Normally they talk amongst the Tibetan youth, and they found that there's so much support from experts, from activists, from leaders, and they are very much encouraged to take up the cause of Tibet as a Tibetan. Actually, it should be vice versa. We should be doing the more, and then. But your presence here was very much appreciated by the young Tibetans who are present here, and Michael, Vijay Kranti, our old friends, and our friend from Scotland. So everybody, I don't remember all the names, but I think we had a very fantastic forum. And then our friends from Yugo, Dolkun is always there. Sometimes we are able to attend each other's conference, sometimes not because of our engagements of our own. But today he could make it. His colleague was in Rome. Now we have to find ways to work together. There are times when the Uyghur issue is sometime at the top, and then Tibetan issues are a little below, and then sometimes Tibetan issue takes precedence over Uyghur issue. This keeps happening. But we have to pool our energies together. What happened in Uyghur on an industrial scale is something that no one can think of in this age and time. It is monstrous coming from a state, and the states that are oppressing people sit at the places where they make decisions for us, and that is the most unfair thing that can happen to humanity. All of us are humans. We all deserve happiness, irrespective of where we come from. And Chinese government, the authoritarian rulers really don't. The job of the rulers is to make sure that their people are happy. But unfortunately, what Chinese government is doing is making their own people unhappy. And I really hope better sense prevails over the Chinese leadership. We don't want China to fall apart, because that would create anarchy. We don't want anarchy in China, because of the independent nature of this universe. Anything that affects China affects the whole world. we also want peace and happiness for the Chinese people. Therefore, I really hope that better sense will prevail over the Chinese leadership and peace will prevail on earth. And we all should work towards it. The national leaders also should not be concerned only about their immediate interests. The leaders of the world should be concerned for the long-term interests of this world, including the climate change. Yesterday I was watching television, news on television. There were a lot of promises from world leaders on climate change, and I think it should not be left only to promises. There has to be concrete action, whether it's on climate change or whether it's on human rights situation. Thank you very much for your presence, and it's really encouraging. I met many of my old friends. This gave me an opportunity to see a lot of my old friends getting back together and catching up on things, and I also met a lot of new friends here. Unfortunately, because of the various engagements, I could not spend as much time as I would have loved to, but this is just the beginning, and we'll definitely follow it through, and we'll keep coming back to meet you again and again and work together and make sure that China is accountable. China is made accountable for their misdeeds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Umosikyong. Next, may I invite Honourable André Gatoulin, Senator, French Parliament, to deliver his closing remarks.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank Sikyong Panpatsering for the good words he had about me and my wife. But that's 40 years before I met my wife that I'm engaged on Tibet issue. And I would say it's very important what had happened during these 2 weeks. And I must say that all the week passed, first in Roma for the IPAC meeting we had, where Panpatsering was one of the guests, the most important guest to this meeting of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. And after that, these two days, this has been for me one of the most, I think, thoughtful, efficient, and inspiring week I spent for many years. I've been present to so many conferences on China, on moreover on Tibet, and I appreciate the very high level and the great quality of all the speeches and also the interest of the audience. And I say this is very important. Why is it very important? Because first of all, you do not concentrate all the purpose on Tibet, but all the people who are now under the pressure, under the repression of Tibet. And it's very important to be united together. That's an important, very important thing. And also perhaps because Tibetan and Tibet is something as, I would say, a sad avant-garde of what is coming if we don't act, if we don't do something, if we don't protect ourselves and protect also all the nation, the oppressed nation. And I'm very happy because I was talking about the IPAC meeting, and the motto we have is resumed in 3 words. Unite. Yes, we have to be united. In front of such a fear, such a threat, we have to be united. And what we try to do as a group of legislators of now 21 countries around the world, 21 democratic countries, is precisely what our government and state are not. They are not united. It's so easy, especially in Europe. We have a kind of federalism, but when China didn't get something from Germany, they obtained it from France, yesterday, Great Britain or Spain. And so what we try to do is to be united as legislators to put the pressure on our government to be united in front of the threat. The second word is protect. Protect is very important. We have to protect the poor, we have to protect the oppressed, and we have to protect ourselves by ourselves. And this is very important. And the third term, the third word is lead. Yes, we must lead. We must not wait. And you are a sad avant-garde of perhaps what will be tomorrow, because for more than 60 years, the Tibetan people, the Tibetan culture, the Tibetan religion is oppressed. And you are still here to resist. You show the best way to survive. Now we want to not only survive, but to live freely, totally democratically. And we only can do that among the international community if we succeed in preserving the international right that protect us. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but more and more we are connected all over the world, all the people, all the activists, all the researchers. It was very important to hear today my friend Martin Hala, because we would work together on questions concerning the interferences of China in the university and on the academy. And more we have these networks from researchers, from activists, from everyday people, young people, and also legislators and politicians. We have the possibility to reverse the situation that is developing now in favor of China. So, I repeat, unite, protect, and lead. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Senator Gatulin. Next, we have reading of Honourable Zaniyak, Mayor of Prague City, Czech Republic. May I invite Kaldefumala to read out his message.
Written message received from the Mayor of the City of Prague, Honourable Zirib Hari. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reassure you that Prague is an open-minded and liberal city which strongly promotes freedom, democracy, and human rights. I believe that cities are important agents in defending these crucial values. In 2019, Prague, together with other V4 capitals, Budapest, Bratislava, and Warsaw, founded the Pact of Free Cities in order to defend freedom and democracy and tackle anti-liberal tendencies, inequalities, populism, climate change denial, and xenophobia. 19 cities from Europe and beyond joined the pact this September, and I feel empowered that the voice supporting human rights and democratic values is strong. I would therefore like to pass this encouragement also to you. Even though my duty is to deal with issues directly concerning Prague, human rights and freedom are universal values. When they are being violated, it is also a duty to speak out. I condemn all practices which lead to the deprivation of civil liberties and human rights. The persecution and pressuring of people for political reasons or on the basis of their religion or ethnicity is unacceptable. This is also why I support the right of Tibetan people for self-determination. Also, Tibet is strongly affected by climate change. This
leads me to another vital and universal topic. There is a clear link between human rights and climate change challenges. The right for safe, clean, and sustainable environment is a basic human right. Moreover, climate change impacts other human rights. Let's work collectively towards mitigating climate change and defending human rights. Thank you for your attention and many greetings from Prague. Ziri Pali, Mayor of the City of Prague, Czech Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kandala, for reading Mr. Harib's message. Last but not the least, may I request Secretary Karma Chuingla to deliver the vote of thanks.
Honourable Mr. Andre Gatulin, Honourable Sikyong Pembatsula, the distinguished guests, eminent speakers, chairs, and members of the audience. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be proposing a vote of thanks for the closing session of the 4th Geneva Forum. On behalf of the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, and the facilitator of this event, the Office of Tibet Geneva, I would like to thank Mr. Andre Gatulin for being the special guest for the closing session. And I would also like to thank Sikyong Pembatsula, who has come all the way from Dharamsala to be with us at the 4th Geneva Forum. I must also not miss to thank our special guests, Mr. Nicholas Walder and Mr. Gelenser Ferenc, and chief guest, Mr. Jiri Oberfalzer, for accepting our invitation at the opening session and for being with us throughout the two-day event. Under the central theme of the 4th Geneva Forum, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Violations by China, we had the opportunity to delve and discuss on topics related to a central theme in 4 panel discussions during these 2 days. The panel discussions were highly informative academically, and more importantly, I believe through these discussions we have made much headway in exposing the violations of economic, social and cultural rights primarily in Tibet, East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia by the Chinese government. I therefore must thank the eminent speakers for the first discussion, Social and Cultural Rights Violation by China, Ms. Tenchu Gyatso, Dr. Michael Van Prague, Ms. Dolpun Issa, and Ms. Solomon Khadgin, and the eminent speakers for the second topic, Cultural Genocide in Tibet, Dr. Tenzin Dessel, Dr. Martin Mills, Mr. Pierre-Antoine Donnet, and Mr. Vijay Kranti, chaired by Representative Sonam Francis, and the eminent speakers for the third topic, the violations of economic rights by China, Dr. Adrian Zenz Tinechugi, and Mr. Marco Raspinti, chaired by Representative Tashi Pinzola, and eminent speakers for the final topic, China's footprint overseas impacting human rights at global level and the way forward, Mr. Kelsang Gelsen, Mr. Martin Hala, Mr. Andre Gatulin, and Ms. Laura Hart, chaired by Dr. Tenzin Dessel, for their time, effort, and intellectually stimulating deliberations on their respective topics. I would also like to thank Dr. Michael Van Prague for sharing his expertise in the light of his latest book, Tibet Brief 2020, which very eloquently puts China's illegal occupation of Tibet in the right historical perspective and reminds the international community not to fall into the trap of China's false and misleading narrative on Tibet's history and Sino-Tibetan conflict. Last but not the least, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Representative Chime Rigzin, the Office of Tibet Geneva, and his colleagues and others involved in hosting this event successfully. I must also thank the members of drafting committee for the 4th Geneva Forum, Dr. Michaela and Kaila, and also I must thank Rinpoche, Zigya Rinpoche, for being with us during this 2-day event. I once again thank you all for your presence contribution and look forward to see you all again next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone in this room for your engagement and participation and attention during this two-day event. With this, we have come to the conclusion. We have tea ready outside, so please take as much time you need for networking with a cup of coffee or tea. Thank you very much and have a great evening.